My name is Cora. I am 39 years old and I am a chief architect. My brother Vance was our family's golden child, a flashy real estate broker who cared only about his expensive image. When he got engaged to the daughter of a billionaire real estate tycoon, he invited me to their extravagant VIP celebration dinner with one strict condition. I was absolutely forbidden from telling anyone I was his sister. He said my practical, working-class lifestyle would embarrass him. My mother eagerly agreed, forcing me to sit at one of the smaller tables in the back near the service door. But Vance made one fatal mistake. To impress his future father-in-law, he had secretly stolen my eco-friendly design blueprints and claimed them as his own. He had no idea the powerful billionaire he was desperately bowing to had been searching for the real architect for months. He did not realize that the person he was most ashamed to claim was the one person in that entire dinner party they would never be able to dismiss. If you have ever been forced to become smaller so a toxic family member could feel bigger, listen closely to how I exposed the truth and made them pay. Welcome to Justice Glow. To understand how my family operated, you first have to understand the difference between building something real and simply selling an illusion. I chose the former. My name is Cora. Over the past 15 years, I worked my way up from nothing to become the chief architect at one of the city's most prestigious design firms, specializing in sustainable, eco-friendly structures. My hands were often smudged with graphite, my boots dusted from walking on active construction sites, and my wardrobe consisted of practical, understated clothes. I did not have the time or the desire to curate a glamorous image. I was too busy making sure the foundations of my buildings would never crack. My brother, Vance, lived entirely in the cracks. Vance was our family's undisputed golden child. He was a high-end real estate broker who possessed an effortless, loud charm and was raised with the kind of manufactured confidence that only comes from knowing the room will bend around you. While I was taking night classes at a community college and working 2 jobs to pay for my architectural degree, my parents were busy pouring their entire savings into Vance. They funded his elite private academies, his debate camps, and his expensive networking programs, all the invisible scaffolding required to make his success look natural from the outside. When Vance landed a job at a flashy real estate brokerage, my parents celebrated as if our family name had finally been redeemed. They constantly repeated his title and bragged about the luxury condos he showed to wealthy clients. It didn't matter to them that he was just a middleman selling other people's hard work. To them, he looked the part. He drove a leased sports car he could barely afford, wore custom-tailored suits, and curated a lifestyle built entirely on curated dinners and empty prestige. Meanwhile, my parents viewed my career with polite disappointment. To them, architecture was just a dusty, blue-collar job with a fancy title. They never bothered to understand what a chief architect actually did, and they certainly never memorized the names of the award-winning eco-towers I had designed. In their eyes, Vance was the masterpiece, and I was just the rough draft they wanted to hide in a drawer. Because I had no safety net and no applause at home, I learned early on that if I wanted a real life, I would have to build it with my own 2 hands. I spent years designing complex, sustainable urban projects that made veteran engineers nervous. I earned every promotion through sheer exhaustion and unyielding discipline. That relentless work ethic eventually caught the attention of Helena. Helena was the president of the National Architecture Association, a razor-sharp, formidable woman whose standards could strip the ego off a careless designer in under 10 minutes. Helena was a titan in the industry, the kind of leader who did not suffer fools or tolerate mediocrity. When I first started working under her guidance, she was the very first person in my entire life who looked at me and saw not what I lacked, but what I could carry. Over time, Helena became much more than a boss or a mentor to me. She became the closest thing I had ever known to being chosen without condition. She taught me how to navigate boardrooms full of arrogant men and how to let my blueprints speak louder than any boastful presentation. She knew everything about my family's toxic dynamic, and she often reminded me that substance would outlast the surface every single time. I had accepted my place in my family's shadow, perfectly content to let Vance have the spotlight while I kept my peace. But I did not realize that Vance's insatiable need for validation was about to cross a dangerous line from simple vanity into outright theft. And I had no idea that the devastating collision between his fake world and my real one was only a few days away. The illusion my brother Vance had built finally demanded a foundation he could not fake when he got engaged to Elise. Elise was elegant, poised, and the only daughter of Alistair, a billionaire real estate tycoon who essentially owned the city's commercial skyline. Marrying Elise was not just a romance for Vance, it was the ultimate acquisition. However, Alistair was a notoriously difficult man to impress. He was not swayed by expensive suits or leased sports cars. He was a visionary looking for groundbreaking, sustainable urban designs for a massive new billion-dollar eco-development project in the city center. Desperate to secure his place in the billionaire's family and win the lead brokerage on the project, Vance made a fatal, unforgivable choice. A month before the engagement dinner, he stopped by my apartment under the guise of a friendly, brotherly visit. While I was in the kitchen making coffee, he noticed my private drafting table. Scattered across it were my master blueprints for a revolutionary sustainable high-rise I called the Holloway Eco Tower. They were weeks of my blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. Vance secretly took high-resolution photos of my entire conceptual portfolio. Days later, he presented those exact blueprints to Alistair, blatantly claiming they were the product of an elite private design team that he personally managed. He stole my intellect to buy his way into high society. I had no idea this theft had occurred until the consequences of his lies finally arrived at my desk. I learned a long time ago that humiliation sounds the cruelest when it is spoken politely. Vance proved that 3 nights before the extravagant VIP dinner that was supposed to celebrate his engagement, his text message came in while I was still at my drafting table, and at first, it looked harmless enough, just another small instruction from a family that had always edited me down to something easier to explain. Then, I read the real part. He wrote that I was permitted to attend the VIP dinner with his fiancé's family, but with one strict condition. I was absolutely forbidden from telling anyone I was his sister. He explained that Elise's father was a billionaire tycoon, and my working-class, dusty architect vibe would be highly embarrassing to his flawless image. A few minutes later, my mother called to smooth it over in the careful, measured voice she always used when she wanted me to accept something ugly without making it inconvenient for anyone else. She told me that it would be best if I simply sat at one of the smaller tables in the back of the restaurant, right near the service door, just for one evening. Just to keep things comfortable, Cora, she said. Comfortable for whom? She didn't say. That was the thing about my family, they never needed to scream to make their meaning clear. Vance got the spotlight, and I got the explanation. He was introduced with pride, while I was managed, hidden, and reduced. And still, I told them I would come. I would show up on time, sit where they wanted, and say nothing. What none of them understood was that the man they were so desperate to impress would know exactly who I was the second he saw my face.
Justice Glow here. Before I tell you what happened when the billionaire stopped at Cora's table and the whole room went quiet, tell me this. What would you do if your own family only welcomed you by pretending you did not belong to them at all? Would you stay quiet or would you walk away? Tell us in the comments below. Now, let's see how Cora handled this.
I didn't answer my brother right away. I set my phone face down on my desk and stared at the dark reflection in the screen for a few seconds. Because some insults arrive so cleanly they do not feel real at first. That message did not come out of nowhere. It came from 39 years of being treated like the piece of the family story that never fit the version they wanted to tell in public. The next morning, I walked into Helena's grand corner office. When I told my mentor about the dinner and the demand to hide my identity, I fully expected fiery irritation on my behalf. What I got instead was total silence, then a very still expression I had learned to respect. Helena set down her pen and calmly asked me for the name of my brother's fiancé, and then she asked for her father's name. Alistair, I answered. The moment I said it, something shifted in her face. She leaned back in her heavy leather chair and let out the smallest breath of disbelief. So, that is who they are trying to impress, she murmured. I asked if she knew him. Helena gave me a sharp look over the rim of her coffee cup and smiled coldly. Cora, that man has been obsessively studying your Holloway Eco Tower blueprints for weeks. He knows exactly who you are. That was the exact moment the shape of the evening changed. Not because I wanted revenge, not yet, but because for the first time, I realized my brother had walked into a trap of his own making. He had no idea. The person he was most ashamed to claim was the one person in that entire VIP dinner party they would never be able to dismiss once the truth stepped into the light. Helena stood up, grabbed her designer coat, and looked at me with a lethal calmness. "I am coming with you to this dinner," she said. "Let them underestimate you in peace." Helena and I arrived at the exclusive restaurant just after 6 o'clock in the evening. The cold city wind made everything feel sharp, but Helena didn't offer any words of comfort. That was never her style. She simply looked at my practical black dress, nodded once, and said, "Good. Let them underestimate you in peace." The private dining room was exactly the kind of place my brother would find intoxicating dark wood, polished brass, and the kind of quiet wealth that never had to announce itself. Every table was arranged with perfect precision to signal high status. When we stepped inside, I saw my family before they noticed me. My parents were already smiling too hard. My brother Vance was standing near the center of the room with his hand on the waist of his fiancée Elise. He was wearing the exact look he always wore when he believed he was finally being seen by the right people. Elise was elegant and poised, dressed like someone who had grown up never doubting she belonged in rooms exactly like this one. The second my brother noticed me, the color in his face completely changed. He crossed the room fast, but he kept his pace controlled so he wouldn't look panicked to anyone else. With a tight smile frozen on his face, he muttered under his breath, "You're late, even though I was perfectly on time." Then, his eyes shifted to Helena. For half a second, I saw pure confusion. He didn't recognize her face, but a man like Vance always recognized power when it walked into a room. Before Vance could ask any questions, Elise appeared beside him. She was gracious and polite, greeting me like a stranger she had been instructed to tolerate. That was when my brother introduced me with an almost impressive level of dishonesty. He didn't call me his sister. He looked right at Elise and said, "This is Cora. She just helps out with minor paperwork at the office." I looked at him for a beat longer than was comfortable, but I didn't correct him. He relaxed slightly, foolishly thinking my silence meant I had surrendered to his lie. My mother came over next. She kissed the air near my cheek and quickly whispered, "We saved you a special seat in the back where it will be much quieter." I knew exactly what she meant. Quieter meant out of sight. She guided us to the smallest table in the entire room, pushed far into the back corner right next to the service entrance where the waiters moved in and out. From that hidden corner, I had a very clear view of the main table, where my brother sat with his fiancée and her wealthy parents. He looked like he had been rehearsing for this exact role his entire life. Helena took the seat right across from me. She sat close enough to watch everything, but far enough away to let the evening unfold exactly as my family intended. I folded my hands in my lap and simply watched the room reveal itself. My brother laughed entirely too loudly. My father tried much too hard to join the conversation. My mother kept nervously scanning the faces of the wealthy guests, desperately looking for their approval. Elise possessed a very controlled charm, but her father, Alistair, was entirely different. The billionaire tycoon said very little. He watched more than he spoke, and he carried himself with a heavy, natural authority that influenced the entire room. I could easily see why my brother was so desperate to impress him, and why he had been willing to steal my architectural blueprints to do it. Men like Alistair didn't just participate in the room, they defined the reality of it. The first round of toasts began, and I noticed something very interesting. The powerful man my family was trying so hard to entertain wasn't captivated by their performance at all. Alistair listened and smiled when it was required, but his eyes constantly drifted around the room. He looked like a man who was searching for something real in a room full of illusions. Then, just before the main dinner service began, Alistair stood up. He picked up a small tray of champagne glasses from a passing waiter. It was apparently an old habit of his, a personal way to show respect by greeting his guests table by table before the meal. I watched him move slowly across the room, exchanging polite words and shaking hands. My brother looked absolutely giddy, believing this moment would become a legendary family story. But then, Alistair turned away from the main crowd. He started walking directly toward the dark hidden corner of the room. He was walking straight toward my table. At that point, I don't think anyone at the main table was paying much attention to Alistair's whereabouts. I was exactly where they wanted me, quiet, small, and safely out of the way. But the second the billionaire tycoon reached my table and got a clear look at my face, his entire expression changed. He stopped so suddenly that the tray tilted in his hands, and one of the champagne glasses gave a soft, sharp clink against another. For a second, he just stared at me. It wasn't with confusion, but with unmistakable, absolute recognition. Then, he set the tray down on the empty corner of my table and straightened up. His voice, when it came, was not casual. It carried across the silent room. Chief Architect Cora? I didn't realize you were here tonight, Alistair said, sounding genuinely caught off guard. It is a profound honor to finally meet you. I have been studying your Holloway Eco Tower master drafts for weeks. I told my entire engineering team that if they wanted to see the absolute future of sustainable urban design, they needed to start with your blueprints. The room went completely still. It was the kind of silence where everyone understands at once that reality has just violently shifted. My brother turned first, all the blood draining out of his face. Elise's expression fractured from polite confusion into deep disbelief. My mother gave a nervous, high-pitched laugh and stepped forward too quickly. She tried to say something weak about me being modest and not liking attention, but Alistair barely glanced at her. Before anyone could attempt to control the narrative, Helena stood up. She crossed the room with the kind of unhurried confidence that made people move aside without realizing they were doing it. Alistair, Helena said smoothly, I had a feeling this evening might surprise you. Alistair recognized the president of the Architecture Association immediately. Helena, you brought her? Of course I brought her, Helena replied coldly. I was curious how long it would take before someone in this room realized who had been seated in the back. Alistair looked from Helena to me, and then toward the main VIP table where my brother was standing completely frozen. Alistair asked the question calmly, but his calm made it so much worse. Why is the brilliant chief architect of the Holloway project sitting back here by the service door? My brother opened his mouth, but nothing useful came out. He tried a desperate smile that collapsed before it formed, muttering that Cora didn't really care where she sat. Helena didn't let him get another word in. She reached into her designer bag, took out her phone, and looked at me once. I said nothing. She turned the screen directly toward Alistair and said, I think the seating was actually very intentional. Then, she read my brother's text message out loud. She read the exact words. How I was permitted to attend, but I was absolutely forbidden from saying I was his sister because my working-class vibe would embarrass him in front of the billionaire. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. Elise stared at my brother as if waiting for him to say it was a joke, but he was too stunned to perform. Vance swallowed hard and stammered, It looks bad out of context. Out of context? Helena's voice turned into a lethal weapon. Let's talk about context, Vance. Because hiding your sister wasn't even your worst offense tonight. She pointed a sharp finger directly at him. Those elite eco-designs you presented to Alistair last week to secure his billion-dollar project? You took photographs of Cora's private drafting table. You stole her blueprints and claimed them as your own. Elise let out a sound of pure disgust. She turned to Vance, her eyes wide with horror. You told me she just filed minor paperwork at the office. You told me she had no ambition. You stole her life's work? Vance tried to answer all her questions at once and only tangled himself further. Alistair finally spoke, his voice devastatingly cold. You didn't hide your sister to protect the evening, Vance. You hid her because you knew her genius would expose your absolute mediocrity. Elise didn't hesitate. She slowly slid the massive diamond engagement ring off her finger. There were no tears, just a chilling realization. She set the ring down beside her water glass with a soft click. You didn't just lie to me, Elise said, her voice shaking with anger. You lied about the kind of man you are. Panic finally broke through Vance's facade. He crossed the room and stopped beside my chair, whispering in a frantic, strained voice. Cora, please. Can we just talk about this outside for a second? I looked up at him, feeling nothing but clarity. No, I said, my voice steady. You were comfortable humiliating me and stealing from me in front of a room full of strangers. You can hear my answer in front of them too. Alistair stood tall, delivering the final blow. "The wedding is entirely cancelled," he announced to the silent room. "And there will be no further discussions about any real estate partnerships." My mother found her voice thin and desperate. "Please, he just made one mistake. You can't ruin his life over this." Helena looked at my mother with pure disdain. "This wasn't a mistake," she said sharply. "This was a habit that finally met witnesses." I picked up my bag, and Helena rose beside me. As we walked toward the heavy wooden doors, I could feel every eye in the room following us. But for the first time in my life, that attention didn't feel like judgment. It felt like absolute justice. We walked out into the cold night air, leaving my brother completely stranded in the ruins of the fake empire he had tried to build. By the next morning, the story had already started moving through the exclusive real estate circles Vance had spent his entire adult life trying to enter. A broken engagement at a formal VIP dinner would have been gossip on its own. But a broken engagement caused by a flashy broker stealing his own sister's master architectural blueprints? That became a career-ending warning. Within a week, Vance's carefully managed reputation began to crack in places he could not patch. The senior partners at his brokerage called him into a meeting. They didn't accuse him of a crime, but they questioned his judgment, his honesty, and the fake version of himself he had been selling to their elite clients. They realized that a man who would steal from his own family was fundamentally untrustworthy. 3 weeks later, the firm asked for his resignation. Without his high-paying job, the wedding, and the billionaire's social lift, Vance's fake empire collapsed faster than even I expected. He lost the luxury apartment he had leased just for show. He lost the sports car. By the end of that winter, the golden child who had once decided I was too embarrassing to claim was calling people he hadn't respected in years, desperately asking for work. My parents did what people like them always do when a lie finally costs too much. They tried to rewrite history. My mother sent me a 4-page email about forgiveness, family loyalty, and how siblings should never let outsiders come between them. My father left voicemails that sounded more tired than sorry, claiming Vance was under unbearable pressure and that I, being the stronger one, should know when to let things go. That was the moment I finally understood them completely. They didn't want justice. They just wanted the version of me who would absorb injury quietly so the rest of them could live without consequence. I changed my number, filtered their emails, and cut them off. A month later, I received a handwritten note from Elise. She thanked me for standing in the truth, writing that seeing how easily a man could diminish his own sister had forced her to confront how often charm is mistaken for character. As for me, I went back to my drafting table and built my life in the steady, disciplined way I always had. A few months later, Alistair formally awarded my firm the lead contract for the billion-dollar Halloway Eco Tower, explicitly demanding that I be the director of design. When we held the groundbreaking ceremony, the site was filled with city officials, elite engineers, and Helena, standing proudly by my side. My parents were not invited, my brother was not told. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is not shouting or destruction. Sometimes it is simply standing still in the truth long enough for everyone else to see who had value all along.
Hello, everyone. Justice Glow here. Cora's story is a devastatingly accurate portrayal of what psychologists call golden child syndrome, mixed with toxic elitism. In families like Cora's, the golden child is given endless resources, while the scapegoat's achievements are minimized to protect the golden child's fragile ego. Vance didn't just hide Cora because of her practical clothes. He hid her because her genuine, hard-earned brilliance threatened his empty, fabricated persona. By stealing her intellectual property, he crossed the line from a bad brother to a malicious fraud. Notice how the parents reacted? Instead of holding Vance accountable for theft and lying, they demanded that Cora forgive him to keep the peace. This is classic enabler behavior. Cora's ultimate victory shows us the power of the no-contact boundary. You cannot heal in the same environment that broke you. At Justice Glow, our team is always working hard to create meaningful, engaging stories that leave viewers with valuable lessons. We want to make it clear that this is a fictional story created for entertainment and educational purposes, with the goal of sharing positive messages and helpful life insights. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please follow and support Justice Glow so we can stay motivated to create more high-quality, compelling videos for you. Until next time, stay strong and let your justice glow.